Begin the current Daf Mesechta Gitin Daf We begin 6 lines down at the top of the Yomid, where the Gemara continues the halacha of the next Mishnah, the third Mishnah in our series of Mishnayos in this first parak of a maybe get, which in the previous Mishnah we had spoken about, again, maybe get min Zayam. We spoke about if you can't say b'fanei nechtav. Then we said if there's Eidim Yishkein b'chisamab, so we got into this conversation about the Eidim on the get. That's our next Mishnah continues on this theme regarding what happens if the Eidim are actually kutim, not regular Yisraelim. What's the halacha going to be then regarding a document in general, and specifically regarding that of the get isha and the shtar shecher? Shizko sponsor Kazakh and Cheskel. Turn to Daf Yomi. Appreciate joining for today's daf. Something discussed in today's daf is the next Mishnah of kol get sheyesh lav eid kuti. Any, again, the word get can mean document that has in it a aid that's a kuti. Now, kuti is an interesting type of a personality. They have a kuthim, which is they're like Jews, non-Jews, but akapanim is puzzle on the regular shtar. We don't believe him. We suspect he might be lying. You'll see in the Gemara, why would that be? Why would Gitin Daf be better in regards to the witnesses that are signed on the get? Which that relates to Allah of matzah's kuti. The Gemara brings in regarding, could you eat a kuti's matzah on Pesach? And one of the fundamental differences for the Allah of our Mishnah we'll see in the Gemara is the difference between get isha and shtar shtaris is that get isha, they don't sign the witnesses if you're not in front of all the witnesses. Which, interestingly, it's actually because of a gzeira, because of he'll say kulchem, which you might run into a problem that he's going to invalidate the get if you're not all there. So therefore you do it all together, which it's a stringency, but it ends up being a leniency in the halacha of Mishnah. Where shtar stars, other documents, Chesman says you could have this witness sign and that witness sign at different times, and since they might not see each other, actually in the halacha of Mishnah with the kuti is actually going to be worse. The halacha has brought that any document that's is made in a secular court, even if their signatures are non-Jews, it's going to be kosher. The Gemara is going to make a differentiation possibly between shtar mecher and shtar matana. Shtar mecher, there's the sale that's happening, and the document is just as proof of evidence of a sale. Shtar matana, on the other hand, actually the document is the acquisition itself. So that's a fundamental difference in what's called a kinyan versus just as a raya of a proof. So we begin the current Daf Yud, 6 lines down at the top of the Yomid. The Mishnah begins. That's what you had mentioned about this. I said about getting around. So the Mishnah says, "Kol get sheyeshulav eid kuti." Any document that has on it a witness that's a kuti is puzzle. It's invalid. Why is it puzzle? I kutim Tosfos said previously are gere ms. What's the problem with a kuti? So Rashi tells us because they're chashidia eid shakar. We suspect that they're saying false testimony. Fine. So a document that has eid kuti is invalid. Chutz migiti nash meshachur avadim, which the Gemara is going to explain. That would seem interesting. Usually you'd say Gitin would be more chomer, it requires a creases, b'nei creases, whatever. No, a get nashim and shechur avadim actually will be kosher with a kuti. And says the Mishnah Maisa, there was a story of Shebilaf near Rabbi Gamliel, Likfar Asnoi. They brought him from Rabbi Gamliel to this village of Asnoi, get isha, but you eid of eid kutim. And the witnesses were kutim, b'hichshur, and he validated. So you see that by Gitin nashim, shechur avadim, eid kuti is going to be kosher. So the Gemara goes on a hunt now to figure out Mani Masnitin, who's the Tana Bar Mishnah? Meaning, Loi Tana Kama, V'loi B'laza, V'loi B'Shem Gamliel. I'm going to bring you a brisa now of 3 Tanoim, and seemingly our Mishnah is not like any one of those 3. Why? Because the Tana learned the brisa. Matzah's kuti. If a kuti has matzah, it's muteres on Pesach to eat, and we're not concerned that maybe it was chametz, that it was fermented. Which Place actually asks an interesting question. He says, wait a second. There's a gzeira on the pas of a kuti in general, which because they were mavatal the building of the Beis Hamikdash in the days of Ezra, and the Brisa tells us in Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer that Rabbi Eliezer says whoever eats pas kuti is like eating basa chazer. So how are you even eating forget about matzah chametz? You not eat the bread of a kuti. So it says Rabbi Tam interestingly says it's the dough of a Jew that a kuti made matzah out of it. So the only concern would be if it's chametzik, but it's not eating his bread. Then says Tosfos says, wait a second, why are you feeling obligation? Maybe he wasn't Shemet L'Shem Matzah because they're chashud on Lifnei Ivra because they read the Torah in a literal way, which means just don't put something that a guy should stumble. But he doesn't mind being Machshel Yisrael these kutim. So how could the Tanna Kama say matzahs kuti is muteres? So he says, interesting also, he says, it's talking about where the kuti has no other matzahs that he can fulfill his obligation. As the Gemara says in the beginning of Chulin, like if he has a bunch of pieces of chicken and you take off one of the heads and you give it to him and he eats it, then you could eat it because he himself wouldn't eat treif, but he would be machshel yid. To take from his private stash, the only thing he has, then that's where we're saying matzah kuti muteres. Okay, Akapan. But
he himself didn't make it.
Yeah. So that's what they says. They say it's the Jew's dough. He didn't have his own dough, and he was baking it. Akapanim. So it's muteres, and moreover, you could even fill your obligation of the chayva of the first night, which that's not stam. The first night is not only it shouldn't be chametzdik. First night has to be what's called shmura matzah. Shmura matzah is because it says be'erev toichel matzahs that you have to make sure that it was protected and safeguarded. Now, even if we know that it's not chametzik, you're not going to fulfill the obligation unless it was protected for the obligation of matzah. Like it says, shmartim esamatzahs. Now, kutim are well versed. They know how to protect it lishma for the sake, and they do it l'shem shimer. As Tais says, it's an added chiddush, and that the bekin in how to protect it for matzah. That's the opinion of the Tanna Kama. Rabbi Shloimy Schwartzberg says no, it's forbidden even to eat all the days of Pesach because we are concerned that maybe it was fermented, that it was a chametzik. And the reason is lefisha in bekin b'tikduke mitzvahs. They're not proficient in the precision of the mitzvahs. A third opinion says it depends. Any mitzvah that the kutim took a hold of, which the Gemara Masechet Chulin explains, that Rabbi Shimon is coming to add on to the Tanna Kama, that even a mitzvah that's rabbinic, it's not even written in the Torah. If they took hold of the mitzvah, they're like muksik in it, then we rely on them. And he says, they're harba medaktikim ba yosim Yisrael. They're actually more meticulous than a Jew in the things that they hold on to. Okay, so therefore, since they're muksik in the mitzvah matzah, then you'd be able to rely on them. It says, "Hol arichis." What's the machlokes Tanna Kama and Reb Shimon ben Gamliel? Akaponim. The Gemara says, "Wait a second, Mahani, who's the Tanna Mishnah? Tanna Kama, if it's a Tanna Kama that says matzahs kuti is muteres and you can be yichiv of matzahs mitzvah, I feel the shashtaras nami. Then in other documents also because they're not suspect, they keep all the mitzvahs in the Torah. And Rebbe Lazar, what do I mean? I feel like get isha nami loy. Then even the get isha also shouldn't work because you tell me a kuti cannot be trusted on any halacha. And going to the third opinion, Rabbi Shloimy Schwartzberg, well, manavshach, ida achzik, if they're established in the halachas of Gitin and shtaris, then afalashash shtaris nami, and even other documents also should work because they are presumed to keep that. And ida layachzik, if they're not established in that, I feel like get isha nami, then even get isha. In other words, documents are documents. If we believe them, if they're muhsik in this mitzvah, so what would be the reason for the difference? So who's the Tana of our Mishnah? It doesn't seem to be anyone. And Bechitim, if you're going to say Rabbi Shloimy Schwartzberg, uda achzik baha, what do you mean? No. They're established in the sense of that they're trusted regarding Gitin and Shechrurin, but b'lo achzik baha. But other documents they're not established to be trustworthy in. Says the Gemara, Ihachi, if that would be the case, then my area, then why are you only validating by a get? Only if it's chad, one kuti, like the Mishnah taught, 8 kuti in the singular. If it's 1 kuti and 1 yisod, it's going to be kosher, but 2 kutim not. Afil treinami. Even 2 kutim, if you tell me they're muchzik in this, in Gitin and Shechrurin, so even 2 kutim should be believed. They're actually, maybe even more medactic, like you saw, like Shimon says, Alama, Amir Rebbe Lazar, why Rebbe Lazar say, the Amira. They didn't validate by the get isha ela eid echad kuti bavad, as the words of our Mishnah seem to be doing, but he just stresses that. So when you have 1 eid kuti, why? They're muchzik in it. So who's the Tanna Mishnah? It's not Tanna Kama, it's not Rebbe Lazar, it doesn't seem to be even like Rabbi Shloimy Schwartzberg. So the Gemara says, Lo'im Rebbe Lazar. It's actually going like Rebbe Lazar, who says that you're right. We suspect them, we don't trust them for any halacha. So wait a second. So why by Gitin, in contrast actually to other shtaras, would we validate 1 eid kuti? So interesting answer, the Gemara says. Ukugoin, the Chasam Yisrael. As we said, there's 2 witnesses that have to sign on the get. 1 kuti is allowed, 1 Yisrael is allowed. The Yisrael was the second signator. He was the second one signed, libsaif, at the end, beneath where the kuti signed. Okay, so therefore what? So the Gemara continues Talmud Beis. Yeah, you need to have 2 shtaras to validate. And the thing is he was the second one. Oh, so says the Gemara as follows. The svara is like this. The ilav the kuti chaver have if this kuti was not a trustworthy, learned person, then the Jew would not have been machtim lei, would not have let the kuti sign mikamei in front of him. And for the fact that he let him sign is a raya that the kuti is trustworthy, which actually Tais has an interesting question also. He says, wait a second, that comes out that really the whole document is being validated through the testimony of that one Jew, because only with his signature do we know that the first signature is valid, and we can't validate a whole document based on one. So Tais says it's not true. He says, the truth is a kuti is kosher by the Raisa because they geri emes. They really are true converts, and they are really kosher. Just rabbinically, we're concerned. So once we know with the second witness that it's not really validating it is the kuti who's doing it. We're just concerned, and once we know that the yid came second, so then we're like, okay, we're not concerned for our concern.
Know that they signed at the same time.
Oh, so there's the Gemara like this. Wait, the Gemara is getting to that point. The Gemara says, wait a second, if that's the case, and you validate because the Yisrael signed second, Safal is Nami. So if the Jew signed second regarding a other deed, you should validate it for the same reason. Ella, obviously, why is that not valid by other documents to presume that kuti is a learned person by having him go first? It's because we say that the Jew, he just left space for someone that's older than him. In other words, he saw this testimony with another Jew. This Jew that was signing, besides the kuti, there was a poor elder Yidden over there and the kuti. So when this Yisrael signed first, he thought that the owner of the document is going to ask one of the elder Yidden to sign with him. So a little covered for the elder Yid, he went and he signed on the bottom. So that to show, like as if, he left room for the first space, which is the more, the one who went first. Now the thing is, the lender actually came and he actually signed after him the kuti above him. And therefore, that's why it's possible, because it doesn't help that he signed second. Doesn't mean anything. Could be he went first and he left. He had to catch the bus. He had to get to work. But he left the first space to show covered for the elder Yid. And then he goes and the kuti is the one that he signs. So that's why it's possible by shar stars. Okay, then Hachinami says the Gemara. So by Geri Isha also you should say Rav Chashavik Laman the Kosher B'nei. He left space for the one that's older than him. You leave the first seat in the bus. You go in the next seat. You leave space for that. And then the kuti goes and sits down. So it's not a raya that must be the kuti is a grace at tzaddik. No, he thought that the elder Yid was going to sign first. So why does it get Isha kosher? So this is also an interesting point. Amra Papa says Zaysen Meres. This tells us the following idea: that in our Mishnah, that we validate a get and still we make it invalid by other documents, is telling us that Eidei HaGet, when you have witnesses on a get, it's unique that Ein Chayis Min Zeh B'lei Zeh. You cannot sign one without the other. They all have to be present. Oh, so obviously the Yisrael saw the kuti signing on top of him, and he signed beneath him. Because if not for the fact that he was a chaver, he would not go ahead and let him sign before him. Meaning, it's not like he was signing and he left space. No, you go in order, and you have to be there anyway. No point. You wouldn't sign first, second, and leave for the first space. You have to not blab the ganze shiur. It doesn't help. You're not running anyway. People want to keep the back seat so that you can run out. In the middle. It doesn't help. You have to stay the whole time anyway.
According to how they describe what happened, there were two Canaans,
right.
Jews, and then there was one kuti. So one of them is the second aid. So when the Yisrael signed, maybe he also still signed at the bottom, thinking that one of the...
No, but that's what I'm saying. Is since you have to wait for the whole thing, you wouldn't sign first on the bottom. You wouldn't sign first. You would sign first if, let's say, you're running somewhere. No, but this is they all have to be there now.
Right, so they're all there.
So if you're all there, so why would you sign first on the second and leave space for the elder? Right, but they would just sign first. They would just sign first. If you're if you're running somewhere or whatever I'm saying, but if they're all there, now in contrast, by the witnesses of other documents, that could be they don't have to be there. So then you have to be concerned that maybe this Yisrael signed first on the bottom. He left space for the elder Yid. He didn't know that the kuti is going to sign on the top. So interestingly, because of this stringency by Gitin that you have to sign together, that's why you could actually validate by kuti, because you know that the kuti signed first. Well, the Yid wouldn't sign after this treif and the kuti, Must be was a chaver, was a learned person. So the Gemara says, my timer. Why did the rabbi say this idea that by Gitin you can't sign one not in front of the other? Why? What would be that reasoning? So it's also an interesting halacha. Rav Ashi says, it's a decree because of kulchem. What does this mean? The Mishnah later on in the on Daf Samach Vav Mabeis, that if someone tells 10 people, I want all of you to write a get for my wife. Kulchem kas v'get le'eshti. So what, you can't all write. So one guy writes, and they all have to sign. Now, if they all wouldn't sign, it would be possible because he was makpid. This is what he said. This only was my t'nai for the get. That's only how he made a get. So therefore, the rabbis instituted that even when he doesn't say kulchem, that all the witnesses should be gathered at the time of the signing because of a case when he might say kulchem, and then it's going to be get pasla, and it's going to be Aisha says whatever. This is mad. So therefore, every time by get isha, you have to have everyone together. Because of that stringency, that's the interesting uniqueness of the halacha of our Mishnah, that Eid Kuti will be kosher because must have been that Yisrael saw that he was a chaver and therefore he signed after that. So interesting halacha, this whole flow of how that comes out to this leniency by Gitin. Now, Kufa, the Gemara goes back to the teaching we mentioned on Omen Aleph. Amr Rabbalaz, it says, Loich shiur by this that we're validating a kuti is ele Eid Echad Kuti b'faz. There's only one Eid Kuti, which we explained is because, the Kuti is not really believed, but you have the Yisrael signing after him, he's like saying, okay, as Akushira. Says, what's Rabbi Lazar teaching us? Tanina, this was learned in the Mishnah. Mishnah said, Kol get sheish Eid Kuti, it says in the singular that has, it doesn't say Eidim Kutim, it says Eid Kuti, is Pasal B'chulu. But, and that's what the Mishnah said, Chutz Mikitei Nashim, that it's kosher. So, Rabbi Lazar Da'amayra, that doesn't say in the Mishnah. Says the Gemara, no. If we only had the halacha of the Mishnah, I would have said that actually, after the trei nami, that even 2 kutim are kosher by a get. Why do we say 1 Eid Kuti? Oh, that was to teach the first half of the statement of the stringency of other documents. Mishum de bishtaris, that because other documents have even 1 Eid Kuti is not good. So I would have thought to say, but by get that it is good, is even by 2 kutim. Kamash Malan, that Rabbi Lazar is coming to teach us that no, as we learned the reasoning, no, it's only kosher by get 1 kuti, because, as we explained, the whole reason why it's kosher because the second one is a Jew that's validating the first one. If both would be kutim, you wouldn't have that whole svara. But you wouldn't know that. You would say maybe it's ebstra svara by getting that both are kosher. So therefore, you need Rebbe Lazar's teaching. Says the Gemara, really? Is that so? Betray loy? Is it really true that 2 kutim are not kosher? But Vaktani, read the end of the Mishnah. The Mishnah, after it said this, it ended off saying, Maisa, there's a Gemara, Amasa, Bahaviu lefnei Rabbi Gamliel, Ikvaris noi get Isha. They brought in front of Rabbi Gamliel to this village, Asnoi, a get of Isha. Vayu Eidav, Eidei Kutim. We read this in the Mishnah, Amen Aleph. And the witnesses were Kutim, and he validated. I thought it was only good with 1. How is it validated with 2? Abai says, no, you're right. Tani Eidoi. You have to amend the reading of the Mishnah. It can't be both. It's not true. Wouldn't make sense. Because we said the whole reason why it's kosher because the second one is Yisrael and the first one is a kuti. You have to read Eidoi, not Eidav. Take out the Yud. Rav Amai says no. Lo'ilam trei. The truth is there were 2 kutim in that get of Rabbi Gamliel. But Rabbi Gamliel miflig palig. You're right. He disagrees with the halacha of the Tanakam of our Mishnah. And if you're going to say what Mebreg Damasa to be saisa, that's not the way of a Mishnah. You don't bring a halacha and then bring a story that contradicts the story you're supposed to support. Says the Gemara, but Chesur Mechsa, you're right, there are words missing. Well, this is what it has to say in our Mishnah. But Gamliel, he disagrees and Machshe B'Shnayim. He validates with 2 kutim. And that was the story that was coming to say that he validated him with 2, which Taisus bothered with the question that says, wait a second, so how could it be kosher with 2 kutim? I thought the whole reason why it's good is because the second Yisrael validates the first kuti. Says Taisus, because according to him, what's called, he's like Rabbi Shloimy Schwartzberg, the achzik baha or the loy achzik baha. That they were muchzik in this Gitei Nashim, but they were not muchzik in Shar Shtaris. That's not so schwer. It's,
okay, according to Rabbi Gamliel, to have 1 Eid sign, 1 Eid could be signed on Kol Shtaris. Now that we put it that he's
no, l'chayr not, because the whole word is regarding him is regarding achzik. If you're not achzik in regarding to Shar Shtaris, so since by moment you could be zeh shloi b'fnei zeh, it wouldn't help you even if you have 1, because he might have signed without the yid over there, so you don't have the yid's heksher by being second to validate.
You don't need a hafshir. They're good or they're not good.
Exactly. So by shar stars that they're not good, now we don't believe them, and therefore you wouldn't know. Exactly. So even one would not be okay. That's how Taisa explains how it would be this opinion from Lil that he disagrees. Says no, even 2 edikutim would be kosher again because he's going like the opinion of Rabbi Shloimy Schwartzberg that is machzik baha and loy achzik baha. We continue to look at the next Mishnah, continue on the same theme regarding not Jewish witnesses and courts regarding the halachas of shtaris. So kol hashtaris ha'olim b'arkoyis shel evdei kachavim. Any documents that are produced in a secular, in a non-Jewish court, which that's what arkoyis are. It's a place of a gathering of the judges of the non-Jewish system. Now, even if the signatures, the witnesses that are signing are idol worshippers, they're not Jewish, it's going to be valid. So here it's the other way around. Previous Mishnah was validating an 8 kuti by Gitin Daf and invalidating by other stars. Here, other stars are valid in the secular courts, but Gitin Daf are not going to be valid. However, Shimon he disagrees. He says that af eluk sherim, no, even the Gitin Daf are going to be valid because loy huskuru, they didn't mention in the Beis Medrash to invalidate, only when it was made by a common man, by a regular not Jew who's not a judge. Who's going to explain what is this qualifying? What are you saying when they invalidated what? It was only when it's done with a hedjit. Are you talking about the Gitin Nashim? Are you talking about shar stars? So Gemara will explain that. But upon we have this machlekes regarding Gitin Nashim Shechur Avadim, if it's valid in the secular courts or not. So the Gemara first wonders and says, Kapasik Vatani, that when the Tana talks about this halacha of arkois, of the secular courts, and he talks about kol hashtaris, that they're kosher, even if they're signed by the not Jewish person, they just said it like a blanket statement. So that sounds like loishno mecher. Sounds like it doesn't make a difference if it's a document of a sale. Loishno matan doesn't make a difference if it's a document of a gift. But that the Gemara finds difficult. Because Bishlem and Mecher, I understand a document of a sale of a piece of property, that you're not making the acquisition with this document. The acquisition is with the money. But it's this, so what happens is Mechiyav, when this person gives Zuzi, when he gives money to his fellow Jew, Kamayhu in front of the not-Jewish judges, Hu Dekana, that's when he acquires the piece of property, because Karka is Nikna Bekesef Oibishtar. So the Kenyan's happening with the money. Now, Bishtaris, what's the document for? That's Shadai Balmahu. That's just evidence that he shouldn't say that, I sold it, now you never got money from you. And it's regarding that we believe the secular courts that just to verify, to ratify something that we know to have happened. Because Dilo Yoav Zuzi Kamai, because if he had not given money in front of them, since these are judges that are established judges, have a marin of shayu, they would not cause such a flaw to themselves because when they struggle to write a document if it wasn't true. So therefore, for proof, for evidence, the secular courts are believed. But the problem is but regarding a document of a gift, but Michael Kani, what is the acquisition happening of the gift? There's no trade of funds because that's what a gift is. A gift is fundamentally different than a sale. So what's the acquisition with? Lav b'haishtara? Isn't it with this document? Through the document is how he acquires it. Where he writes to him, my field is given to you, and there's no chalipin, there's no kinyan, but that kinyan of the shtar. Now, question is, how does he acquire with handing over the document? But this document that was made in the secular court, it's a piece of earthenware shards because there's no edim ksherim. So how are you going to validate? How are you making a shtar mecher, a shtar matana, with a document from the secular court? Regarding evidence, fine, we believe them. But kinyan, how do we make a kinyan with a shtar that has to have a chalois, has to have a halachic significance, which they don't have these halachas. So how could they go ahead of this kinyan of shtar? How do they make a document on something that they don't have any halacha bearing on. In other words, if it's just for us to know the truth, let's say even by a goy, we say this idea of like mesich lefi tumai. When he's talking and then he doesn't realize what he's trying to say, so okay, rely on what he's saying because we just want to know if it's true or not. But we don't rely on him to create an actual kinyan. He can't go ahead and make a document to make an actual kinyan where he doesn't have that halacha of creating something of a star. It's a chas palma. It's just a piece of earthenware. So even if we'll know the truth is, but how are you creating a kinyan? He doesn't have this halacha of kinyan.
Confirming the kinyan was made.
Oh, but that's what I'm saying. That's only by mecha, not by matana. Matana, the actual star is the kinyan. The kinyan is through giving over. When you give over the star, that now becomes this person's field. So,
But where does the Gemara take it that what the Mishnah says, Kol Ashur is Omer, because we believe, is only where there's no kinyan? Maybe the Mishnah says, even when this is what makes the kinyan.
you mean to say maybe that there was a different kinyan done? You mean like chalipin?
The Mishnah is okay with Mishnah is okay with Metra and Matan.
I'm saying the question is the Gemara is asking is how does it work?
Establishes that there's a difference between Metra and Matan, and therefore it can't be that in the Mishnah where it's how come the Mishnah says also by Matan. Yeah, that's exactly what the Mishnah is saying. We're okay with that.
But no, but I'm saying we're asking how does it work by matana?
Yeah.
How does it work? Because the guy is signing on it, and the guys are making the document, but that they don't have a halachic they don't have an ability to make a halachic kinyan of star. They don't have those halachas, so they can't create it. What? So say what is it? What?
Receipt.
How do you know?
How do you know which part?
That they don't have their concept of
No, so I'm saying it's not there.
is the transaction.
Right, I'm saying because they don't have this halacha. Just we say usually anything that you
What
don't.
do they do for the shtar? Why do they make the shtar?
Oh, they're because you came to them. You come to the courts. The courts, you see the guy. You come to the judge.
You go in for a notary?
No, you're and so that's what the Gemara is asking. The Gemara is asking, you went to the secular courts. Now, does that work? So the Mishnah makes it sound like that it works. How does it work? They don't. It's a chaspa ba'alma. If the witnesses are not kosher, and the witnesses are what makes the document, the goyim signed on it. So goyim are not able to create. They're not kosher edim. Goyim are not kosher. It has to be two yidden that are kosher, that are edim, and the edim are not stam. Just to verify, it's making the document. It's making the kinyan. How do you make it?
But isn't there also a kinyan taking place with the matana itself? In other words,
No,
it's a property, there has to be some other
It's the
form of
star.
kinyan in
No,
order to be
that's what I'm saying. The
matana.
Gemara is assuming that no, it's the star that's making the kinyan. That's generally how it's done. Usually by matana, you don't do other kinyan. You give them the star, it's yours now. And the question is, how is that working? It's only with the star, and the star is a pasla star. It's a chasba alma because you have goyim sign in it. How does that work?
What's the fear of it
I
working?
think what he's asking
What's
is
the disadvantage of it working?
the matana is
It's
kinyan.
not a disadvantage. It just can't work.
What is it
Goyim
called?
sign
Just
don't
sign
make a
hands.
star. Star
He
has
has
a.
it already. That's what you're saying. He has it. So what use
No, I'm not
is
sure.
the
It
shtar?
doesn't
No, it doesn't have it.
It's not too deep. It's very simple.
Doesn't have it.
Mishnah is okay with both.
No, that's our question. The question is, how does it work with both? How does it work with a goy? Like the way if you look at the Tesis Rid over here, the Tesis Rid says like the Eidos of Yikachav Me'enim Klum. It's nothing.
So since there's nothing else, there's only a star.
Look at Rabbeinu Chanai. Like if you look at the Tesis Rid, like you have it in your Gemara Tesis Rid. They have it right. So I'm saying like on the second and third wide line, like he said, he goes through this. He says it doesn't help even if they're saying the truth. They can't create.
But the Mishnah says that whatever
But they could be extra for a get isha.
You'll see the Tesis Rid. The Tesis Rid seems to like spell it out on the wide lines of the Tesis Rid. He like goes through this, the first four lines of the wide lines of the Tesis Rid. Like he spells out what we're saying that like, if it by shtar mecher, which just to like know the truth, so fine. But when you have to actually create double shakinyan and totally do some, even if they both agree, there's no kinya the karka because the kinyan happens through the shtar, and they can't create a kinyan because their edus is not kosher, and the edus is what makes the shtar. What?
What is the Mishnah referring to?
That's the Gemara's question.
Only
That is the Gemara's question. How does it work by a shtar matana? I understand shtar mecha. Why does it work by shtar matana? So the Gemara has two answers for this question. Amar Shmuel. Shmuel says that dina de malchusa, the laws.
So based on Shtar Matana, the Shtar is really irrelevant. Nothing to do with
Shtar matana is the only the relevancy.
According to the Mishnah, it could be a Shtar, but it's worth it. It has to be another thing.
No, that's our question on the Mishnah. The Mishnah makes it sound like that the shtar matan is going to work. Now, shtar matan fundamentally is different in what it does than the shtar mecha. Shtar mecha is just as a proof. Exactly, and they're just telling. No, in other words, there's two things a shtar could do. A shtar could just be proof, evidence, or a shtar could also actually create the kinyan. So by shtar mecha, the document is just proof. So it's not doing any halachic acquisition. So good. So we trust them because judges, they wouldn't just put their reputation in jeopardy. And if they said, it must have been the guy handed over the money, so the kinyan was done. But by shtar matana, I don't care. I can believe you 1,000,000%. You're not able to create a document. You're a guy. You don't have halachic rights in your. Yeah, but the question is, but how did the matana work? That's the Gemara's question. Yes. So the Gemara is saying, yeah, dina de machusa. When you come to the laws of the non-Jewish government, is dina. In other words, that we actually give them halachic rights because of it. There is din in itself, as the Gemara elsewhere explains the source of this idea. Yes, it would actually create a kinyan.
Is there allowed to make a kinyan because of dina?
Exactly, dina machusa dina gives them that. What? Right. So that exactly. So as like if you see in the Taisus read again, he says that even though the shtar of Chasim is not considered a shtar because they're not kosher to be made in that Torah, but since the Melech was gazer shiur shtarim kayamin, v'inamun beidusin shtar kosher v'koin after matana. Like the Taisus spells it out. It says that makes it into a good document. If you want to consider another approach, actually, that Tani actually you should read in the halacha of our Mishnah that we said all documents are valid except for Gitin Nashim. You should read Chutz Miki Gitin Nashim. Interesting answer, the Gemara says. Meaning, the exception wasn't only that will not work is Gitin Nashim, it's anything that's like Gitin Nashim. So what does that mean? Meaning that the document is what actually finalizes the deal, and not just for a proof, which is what a get is, that a shtar matana is the same thing. And you're right, we're excluding it that it will not work.
But the Gitin really also helps for her to be going to the sitter.
Yeah. Right, but that's not only what it does, obviously. It also creates the divorce. And for that, they're not valid. And then there's a Rashi and a Taisa that we could the Gemara could have said another type of approach. Taisa's whatever has this whole arichas in with Rashi. But
according to the first answer, why aren't we validating a get nashim? Because so.
Right. It's only regarding dina, only regarding monetary law, not regarding isser, not regarding prohibitory law. Regarding that, we don't say that.
Anything that qualifies under isser
right.
goes under that point.
Right. Now, the Mishnah said that Shimon Omer, he says, Af Elu. He says also these, that Gitin and Shechrui Avadim are also going to be kosher in our kais. He disagrees. He says, yeah, actually go to the secular courts and the get will work, not like what we just said. He says, well, how could that be? But they're not in the category of separation, which the terminology of the biblical verbiage of the sefer creases. That is, since they don't have Gitin and Kedushin, so they cannot be witnesses for this, because it says in the Torah, B'chasa b'nasan, whoever has the halacha of giving a get, has a halacha of writing a get. But they don't give get, so how could they write a get? And Taisa says the Gemara could have asked also, they're not b'nei edus ninu. They don't have a halachic, they can't be halachic witnesses when it comes to Isser. So what are you talking about? How could you say that a get is kosher if you made it in a secular court with secular judges and secular witnesses? Some of Zera says, Yared Yershima l'shitasa shabalazar. Reb Shimon was going like the opinion of Reb Elazar. That what Reb Elazar holds, Dama Edim Masira Karti. He says that actually what creates the creases of the get is the witnesses who see the get being given over. As the Gemara says in the last parak on Daf Peivav, that even though there's no witnesses in the document, you just gave it over in front of witnesses. According to Reb Elazar, that's what creates the get. Oh, Reb Shimon also validates that you're right. This get is a secular document, but even though there's non-Jewish witnesses, it was given over in front of Jewish witnesses. And therefore it's going to be valid. Says Gemara, but wait a second, that doesn't make sense. Because Amr Baba said, even Reb Elazar agrees that even though you don't need to have witnesses, but if it's forged from within, then it's going to be invalid. So although he says that a get without any witnesses kosher, that's only if there's no witnesses. But if you have edim that are puzzle, then it's rabbinically puzzle. Why? Because you might come to give it over in front of those witnesses and rely on them, but since they're puzzle edus, you might run into a problem that you might use them for a different time, for the edim mesira, and therefore if they have these not good witnesses inside, it's puzzle. So didn't you tell me the cases that the witnesses are not Jewish in the document? So how could Reb Shimon validate it because he's going like Reb Elazar? Even Reb Elazar says it's flawed if you have not kosher witnesses signed inside. So it says Gemara over here, as a Gitin Daf, very interesting answer. We're talking about where it's distinctly not Jewish names, where it's not common that a Jew would ever have such a name. So you're not going to come to rely on those witnesses because everyone knows that they're not Jewish. So therefore, that's the case that it's not a problem about Mazuif Metoichet. What does this mean? Distinctly not Jewish names. Samra Papa, maybe we have to update it for 2023, but it says Kagain Hormiz, which Taisa explains if the gear says Hormin or Hormiz, and Va'avudina, which Taisa explains that's all one name, because if it's two names, then it actually would be a Jewish name. And Bar Shivsoi, which Taisa explains that also because this is actually very debated. People would name Shabsi or Shabsai. Taisus has these girsois over here. Are these not Jewish names? Are they Jewish names? Different girsois in Taisus is Shivsa, whatever. But there's a whole discussion with Shabsi and Shabsai. But Shivsoi, Bar Shivsoi is a not Jewish name. Uvar Kidri is a distinctly not Jewish name. Uvati, which Taisus explains that with an aleph, actually without an aleph, actually is a Jewish name. So interesting how these distinctly not Jewish names, Taisus is very busy with that. They're very close to Jewish names. Benokim and Una. These are all names in Talmudic times. They were not Jewish judges, so they were picking their names. But those are distinctly not Jewish names that maybe like Liam, when they have all these popular not Jewish names, everyone's naming whatever. These are the goyish naming, So if this name is signed on the document, then it's okay. Says, wait a second. But let's say it's not a distinctly not Jewish name. You have many names that Jews name and not Jewish people name. What would the halacha then be? So what do you tell me, Loi? That wouldn't be okay because that would be running into mezuif metaycha because agoy is gechasmet, and you told me that that's mezuif metaycha because then you might come to rely on another time because not everyone knows that he's distinctly not Jewish. If that's the case, wait a second. Adatani sefer instead of the sefer the Mishnah telling me. The loy huskuru, we didn't mention that when it's going to be absul is is only when it's made by the common person, common Joe, the not Jew, not a judge. But if it's in the courts, then actually af eluk share and the name of Gitin Daf are going to be kosher, even though it's not Jewish witnesses. Wait a second, liflik v'lisnei b'dida. Why didn't you differentiate and say no? Even in the courts themselves, that it will depend if this will be kosher or not. But when we say that it's going to be kosher by a get and shechar avadim according to Rabbi Shimon, is on B'Shem Mavakim, distinctly not Jewish names. But if it's not clearly not Jewish, it's actually worse. No, because that will be mezoiv metaycha. You'll run into the problem. You might use that not Jew for Eid Mesira a different time. So yeah, that's exactly what the Mishnah means to say. Imagine when we say this halacha that it's going to be kosher by Gitin and shechar avadim according to B'Shem Mavakim. Clearly, distinctly not Jewish names. But if it's not clearly not Jewish, then then it becomes like other documents of sale, where they're kamisha nasr beheaded when they're made by common people, not in courts, where they're most definitely psul is going to be puzzle because they're not particular about their reputation, and they will sign falsely, because as Rashi explains, this nasr beheaded is going on other shtaris that are used for as a proof. With there's reason to differentiate between a regular person or courts, because by get isha, regarding creases, a regular person and the courts are all the same. So what the Gemara means to say is, we didn't mention, that's what Rabbi Shimon is saying, we didn't mention that Gita Isha will be possible. I mean, I disagree with you. I hold Gita Isha are kosher with non-Jewish witnesses. When did we say it's going to be possible? That's only when they're not distinctly not-Jewish names, where that's like other shtaris made beheaded, where then they don't care about themselves and their reputation, where it's going to be possible. That's when it's going to be possible. Also, but again, they're very different reasons, so the wording is a little misleading. But come on, that's when it's going to be possible. And one more, Iboy Sema, if you want, you could say that actually Seifa, which you were asking from Lehuskuru, is actually a son legite moment. It's actually not going on the Seifa of the Mishnah. It's actually going on the Reisha and it's Rabbanan. We were reading it as it's part of Reb Shimon's statement. We were asking Reb Shimon, what do you mean? Why say Nasa beheaded, wanting to differentiate our cars itself? It's actually not Reb Shimon's statement, although it sounds like it is. It's actually going back on the Reisha of the Mishnah. The Reisha of the Mishnah was the Rabbanan, the Tanakama. And they said that any document of money that's produced in a secular court is going to be kosher. For example, let's say shtar mecher, as we explained the reason before, where the acquisition is happening through the money, and the document is only just verifying this fact. Now, if you didn't give money in front of them, they wouldn't, ruin their reputation to write a document. So, this is what the Mishnah is saying. We didn't mention that there will be a case of a monetary document that's going to be invalid. That's That's only when it's done by a regular person. They don't care about ruining their reputation. That's when we said that it's going to be possible. It's not even Reb Shimon, it's the Rabbanan, and therefore there's obviously no question whatsoever. Thank you to any time for hosting us.